Continuing the series boss in school, Seth Kong is the most fierce kid in kindergarten who beats up any upperclassmen who dare to bully him. When he reaches grade 3, Seth Kong inherits the black society conglomerate from his grandfather, and becomes the handsome chairman with a lot of money inside and out. In the previous part, Seth's mother single-handedly wiped out the Japanese mafia gang. Seth came home and saw his mother still safe and he ran inside happily. He then discovered that the little girl Akira was working part-time in the grocery store and asked her very strongly. This guy with a thin face is the boss of the three-headed demon Meduki. Kevin came to him and offered a suitcase full of cash to get the Japanese guy out of the way. But the thin-faced guy didn't just want a simple way to get into Korea, he also wanted them to help him smuggle contraband in and then he would agree to the request. How could Kevin dare to agree to such a crazy thing? The other guy also saw through it and gave him time to think carefully. At the same time on Jeju Island, Seth was being beaten up and thrown into the field, stuck to the wall. The guy who did it was John Lee from the Mandu Party. The reason why this guy hid in the shadows all day and came out today was because he wanted to know who had beaten up his brother. Seth was at the company when he received a phone call. The caller was Seth with a gasping breath. On this side he only said a few words and then passed out. John just grabbed the phone and warned him to hand over the person. Seth heard the name of this gang and pondered for a while. But his temper was not easy to mess with. If he touched a finger on him he would bury their whole family. At this time Seth was very peaceful sitting in class when he saw Akira just arrived. In his mother's eyes he was no different from a very scary demon. Seth dropped his backpack. Seth wanted to go out and talk a little. Seeing the two of them walking together, little Sophie also followed and watched closely. And he was now confronting his mother why she appeared in his mother's coffee shop. She spoke softly and didn't say a word. Seth got angry and wanted to pry her mouth open. That made the girl cry and made Sophie have to stick her head out to check the situation. But Seth didn't understand what the hell was going on either. On this side the thin-faced guy returned to the base and as soon as he entered it was deserted like a deserted temple. He ran in to find the leader Ryzen and saw him sitting on the floor in a daze. He didn't know what was going on but he still relayed the message from Trang's gang. They would gather to take over Sunlight. Hearing this, the old man sweated like rain. The people were afraid of Seth like a mouse. Just do it and then they all sat on the altar, making the thin-faced guy wonder what the hell had happened. Seth was ready to go home when he was stopped by 4 guys. They were all the captains of the clubs. They didn't say anything but they wanted Seth to go with them. He didn't care about any of them. On the upper side was the student council president L. Jackson was witnessing everything, and he was determined not to let Seth have a moment of peace. Seeing them gathering around him, Seth was calm as if he didn't care what they said and had more important things to do. He made Gabe, the captain of the Taekwondo club, furious, who thought that Seth was only relying on his friendship with Brock to look down on life with his nose. Sam, the captain of the judo club, also told Seth to be less arrogant, but he didn't give a damn and said he liked it. But when he saw Gabe making a fuss and being rude to him, Seth couldn't help but show a warning face and tell him to shut up. The guy was ready to go, but he was stopped by Kendall Scott, the captain of the fencing club, who wanted to start a friendly match and pulled out a wooden sword. It was the first time Seth fought with this form, so he smiled mockingly, making Scott feel insulted and charge at him. When the sword was close to his face, Seth just lightly dodged his head and cut him. When he attacked from above, Seth ducked down below and gave him a bright smile, making him frustrated because he couldn't do anything to him. At this point, Gabe also showed up, standing next to him from who knows when. The sword also followed its master, and seeing the two of them standing on both sides of his partner, Jason broke out in a cold sweat and knew he was screwed. Down here, Scott was finished with one blow, and then Gabe sneaked up behind Seth and just as he dodged him, he was grabbed by Damien, the president of the wrestling club. They thought that one behind and one in front would be enough to take him down. But Seth just smiled wickedly and then headbutted the guy in the face. He took the opportunity to grab his fat neck and ordered him to hit Gabe and make them both fall. He had just seen his comrades being knocked down and looked up to see Seth's punch flying at him like a god. Then he landed on his face and sent him to hell. Everything happened in a flash and made them all dumbfounded. Adding insult to injury, Gabe and Rude Tongue praised Seth to the sky for his previous achievements, making Jason stand in the middle and want to wet his pants and lose his soldier this time. Seeing the two guys lying at his feet, Seth was amused and looked at Sam, the only one left, who naturally wanted to run away and beg for his life. Seeing him shaking like that, Seth lost his interest and spared him a life. Just as he turned to leave, someone called him back. Gabe upstairs was waving his hand and saying that it was polite to greet each other when classmates met, and then he dragged out the mastermind behind the plot, Jason. Seth just glanced at him, and Lynn revived his face and looked away. He didn't care enough to play with insects. So they let him go and warned Seth that if he touched his hand, he would lose his hand. Zed had arrived at Jae-hoon and entered a house. So John's gang was waiting for him while Zed was thrown into a corner. Two of them provoked him first. But when they saw Zed walking alone and he had someone escorting him, they felt ashamed and let those two go. He quickly came to check if Zed was dead or not so he could call the ambulance. But the guy was still holding on and shouted to call for help. John also didn't understand why they did that just for a high school kid. But Zed just wanted them to let go of the person. Lin only wanted to avenge his brother and didn't want to make it so extreme. But the guy he was looking for was the one who gave Zed a deep scar on his face. They wanted to take revenge too, but they had to defeat Zed first and then consider. And if they lost, they had to obediently pack up and leave Korea. The teacher was easy to please and agreed to let his two fighters go. And they immediately got excited and punched and kicked each other, but Zed just stood still and took the attack. But he looked like he was bitten by a mosquito and didn't change his face. And then he quickly returned a punch right on the face and flew out 8 feet. The other one was also choked and lifted up and just foamed at the mouth and couldn't resist. Then Zed threw him aside and glanced at Lin Doan who finally got up. The two four-eyed looked at each other, and then he took a stance to kill him. Even though he saw the steps of Doan, Zed didn't dodge and ate a finger of his and flew back. Just when Lin thought he had won and was sure of it. Lin still didn't realize that the other guy was just loudmouthed, and was about to teach this frog at the bottom of the well a lesson of life. But he was stopped by someone, the Chinese guy who respectfully bowed to Zed. He came here on behalf of his boss and whispered something to Doan. And even though he was reluctant, he had to obediently follow. They wanted to help the wounded and they would be compensated by their boss, and then they left. Doan was still adamant and didn't give in for the next time. But Zed was also determined that next time he wouldn't have a life to go back. Zed was lying there wheezing when Sophie called and asked to go see a movie. To please the stick he agreed with a grimace. While he was happy, Akira was being beaten by his mother to the ground. And forced to drag the big suitcase up the mountain. His mother couldn't breathe and she also met Na. Seeing the girly appearance of Zed's mother she could only sigh. After 82 lifetimes of suffering, they finally got to a temple. Inside was a monk that she called Master. Suddenly there was a kid who was crazy and talked a lot. He just smiled with the kid and then changed his face with Akira. And made him swear. Zed and Sophie were about to go into the theater to watch a movie. When suddenly he was ganked by his dad. He looked at him with a hateful eye and told them to go out and eat and talk. He smiled at his daughter and only wanted to see Zed's face. But he quickly turned his face and looked at him with half a bullet-shaped eye. The tense atmosphere made the other person wary. But he still acted politely with Zed. Akira was on the temple and wanted to hang himself with an electric wire. Then the guy who had been weighing the pros and cons like a thief in front of him. He didn't know what the hell was going on when the guy came back and laughed like a crazy runaway. Making Akira doubt the life here was a place of demons. Inside, the two people were whispering to each other. Wanting to leave Akira here for the monk to teach. In a few days, they would return him as a new person and Seth's mother would also perform the ceremony and leave. Sitting in the cafe now there were only 2 men. Sophie had been kicked out to make it easier to talk. The most important thing now was that he wanted to know Seth's identity. He said it for fun but he had someone investigate and found out that he was the heir of the Sunshine Group. He didn't forbid him from seeing his daughter just for this reason. Which surprised Seth but then he took out a picture. It was the people with ugly faces at Incheon Airport. He only helped him this time because of his daughter's safety. If Sophie got into trouble with Seth, he was ready to send Sunshine to hell. After he left, he picked up the picture and looked at it for a while. Seeing Sophie coming in, he quickly crushed the picture. And smiled as if nothing had happened and then quietly put the picture in his pocket. Seeing his mother's smiling face that wanted to break his jaw, Seth also made a very happy face. But only a second later the smile disappeared. After the two of them finished watching the movie, Sophie kept talking about everything under the sun. Seth said that today was very fun but his face was very unhappy. After the two of them said goodbye, the car came to pick him up. Seth quickly took out his phone to call but Jake was standing in front of Ji's hospital bed and pondering. Not paying attention to the phone that was on. Seeing that he didn't answer, Seth had to throw the crumpled picture and go find them. But the guy just opened it and saw it and was quite shocked. Seth saw his expression and immediately knew this bunch. The guy couldn't hide himself and had to spit out that he was the 3rd son of the boss of the biggest 3-headed demon gang in Japan. Hearing the name Maduki Ryanosuke, Seth's face immediately darkened and he identified his target. In another place, John was standing with the high school kid who had been poked in the eye. And the man who was fuming was the boss of the Mado Moon Lee gang and also the father of the 2 brats. John was still unhappy because he was called back while his brother was beaten and only had one eye to see life. But he was scolded by the old man for being stupid and useless. The trio had left Korea for a reason. Not because they were afraid of sunlight but because of that crazy woman. He remembered the time when he was young and had confronted Seth's father. When Seth's mother appeared with an L-shaped eye and looked down on the world. She was the one who gave him the long and crooked scar on his face. And because he had learned a lesson for life, he advised his son not to be foolish and go to Korea and then left. The younger one started to apologize because it was his fault for picking a fight with them. But John was determined not to let go of this grudge or he wouldn't be human. Seeing Sophie still smiling and unaware, Seth remembered the words that his mother had said and was very angry. Jae-hoon swallowed outside and remembered that Rot had said that someone was targeting his boss. But they still couldn't do anything because Jake was still stuck with some things and they had to be careful. But for Jae-hoon, he didn't care about the fight, but he had to watch Seth properly. He had just praised that the weather was beautiful today when the two guys Brock and Victor came in fiercely. But they didn't meet him directly but went to the principal's office. Then he remembered that he broadcasted and called Seth to the gym after school. Without waiting for long, he immediately got up and went to find them. As soon as he arrived, he saw the teacher and the two guys. He went straight to the point and asked what was going on that they called him. Brock probably wanted to rematch with Seth, seeing that he seemed to be pondering. Then Victor provoked him and said that he wasn't a turtle with a retracted neck. But Seth didn't care about the reason, he just wanted to fight them. Jae-hoon also followed his boss but only dared to hide outside and watch. The two people started to warm up but when they gave the gloves to Seth, he didn't wear them. Because he didn't want this to be a normal sport and if there was any problem, he would take responsibility. The four eyes looked at each other without saying a word and Brock threw a punch straight at his face. But Seth was able to block it with one hand and then returned the favor and the guy also dodged. The two of them rushed at each other, the scene changed and a henchman reported that he had found Seth for the scar-faced boss of the three-headed demon gang. Every punch of Brock was easily blocked. Seth was now playing with him and smiling happily. Then he quickly gave him a punch right in the chest and made him fly back. But he didn't expect that with that move, Brock could still hold on. And he countered him with a quick punch that had to admit that the guy was very strong. When he was in the first year, he had beaten up the whole third year. He knew that but the teacher didn't expect that Seth would appear out of nowhere and be as powerful as a fish. Not only blocking all the punches of Brock but also counter-attacking in a blink of an eye. Seth was about to deliver the finishing blow but he realized and curled up to protect his face. Brock was completely suppressed in a passive position and could only stand there and take the blows. Luckily for him, the teacher stopped in time because it was lunchtime. Seth looked at Brock standing and breathing like a dog, then turned away but didn't forget to kick the unfinished thing. See you again. Standing outside witnessing everything, Victor also had to sweat before this oppression. The guy with the thin face was talking to the guy from the Xian family after confirming that he would get a reward. Then he immediately mobilized a bunch of cars to go for food. At Incheon Airport, the gang of Mandu gangsters still argued with their parents and went to report their lives. In the picture of Seth in uniform, they also flocked to find him. At this time, Seth was very peaceful in class, looking at the sky and clouds without looking at the board. As for Ruth, she still stood outside every day as a duty to observe and protect. Suddenly seeing a line of cars coming to the school gate, because they were all buses, he still didn't understand what was going on. Until they pulled the gate and swarmed down like ants standing to greet the guy with the thin face, Ruth realized that he was dead. The guy immediately saw the cigarette he was smoking falling down. The bald guy standing at the door saw that and was alert. Seeing the crowd of them flocking into the school, Ruth could only threaten him to open the gate for me to go in. Seeing the guy still stubborn, he didn't bother to say anything to waste saliva. Directly moved forward and grabbed his collar and pulled him to hit his head on the gate. Ruth's face was still unchanged, very calm, pulled out a stick, and hit it. He stretched out his eyes very cold. But grabbing the fence and flying over, but because of his legs, he got stuck and just flipped his neck down the pond. Just kissing the ground, Ruth was in pain but still lost his phone to call for help. Here Jae-hoon was sitting obediently in class studying seriously. Receiving a message from Ruth that the dog was here, he jumped up and startled all the students. Then he calmly asked to leave the class but still couldn't escape Seth's sharp eyes. In the rock practice room, Victor was still pondering about life. That guy had to practice more to have a chance to win. But he still insisted that he hadn't lost because he hadn't played his wrestling specialty yet. Suddenly the door was kicked open and smashed. The younger brothers of the guy with the thin face just went in and lined up. Both of them realized something was wrong but didn't expect them to find Seth in the picture. They saw that there was no one else but these two, so they decided to leave, but they were called back. Rock wanted to know what this bunch of trash was looking for his opponent for. Then the two freeloaders sneaked in and stepped out in front of them. This group of people had gone inside the school and split up to look for him. As soon as they were about to go upstairs, Jae-hoon had been standing there waiting for a long time. When he saw the three-headed demon suddenly appear here, he was excited. Seeing that they sincerely wanted to know, he was ready to answer that he was from Sunshine. Then he jumped straight from the stairs and stood right in front of the sharp-headed guy. When they understood the situation, the knife in Jae-hoon's hand had already stuck in his stomach. Sitting in class listening to the teacher's lecture, Seth paid attention to the noises outside. The physical education teacher was obediently acting as the principal, but they had kicked the door and stormed in, led by the flat face. At that moment, he had just stood up. The glasses-wearing guy who was in front of him immediately circled behind and grabbed the teacher's shoulder and pressed him down on the seat. They took out a picture and ordered him to hand him over. When he saw that it was Seth, he was also stunned for 3 seconds. The flat face threatened to call him out or he would pay with his life. The teacher didn't know whether to laugh or cry and wanted to call the police in front of them. The flat face just calmly said, "Try it and see." At the same time, in the physical education room, Brock was still stubborn and wanted to know why they were looking for Seth. But the onion-headed guy acted defiant and invited him to bark, then turned around and swung a sharp stick and rushed over. But he hadn't barked yet when he was hit by a punch that distorted his face. And before he could fall down, he was given another one that sent him straight to hell. Before that scene, everyone was shocked, but the other group was still eager and rushed up. Brock didn't care about any of them. Like a mad dog, he grabbed one by the face and threw another one. Victor saw him so fierce and didn't want to lose, so he jumped out and showed off, and the two of them fought with them. On this side, when Gabe had just finished the leader, he poked the itch of the rest of them and they all rushed over. There was a guy holding a Japanese sword rushing forward, but Gabe just dodged lightly to avoid and then cut his neck off. Facing the whole crowd like that made him remember his partner who had pulled him away or something that he didn't see responding. Then he is now outside the schoolyard clearing all this to that. A second ago Ruth was still concerned about the safety of Gabe and the young master. But a second later, he smiled to his ears and ignored his soul and whoever was angry, then like another guy with blood holding a stick rushed to them. Because the noise was too loud, it attracted the attention of the students in the class. At this time Seth also realized that there was something wrong. There was a guy holding a knife aiming at Gabe, but he was faster and stabbed the knife straight into his wrist. There was just one guy and the whole bunch was waiting in line for their turn. Another guy just got mad and was stamped by Gabe on his face, making him spin into an empty classroom. The noise made Seth unable to sit still anymore and pulled the whole flap out to prepare to leave the class. Seeing the teacher ask where he was going, he just coldly warned no one to get out of the class and closed the door. As soon as he stepped down the stairs, Seth frowned when he saw the body lying there. He immediately realized that Gabe was in a difficult situation surrounded by them and breathing like a dog. Seth just looked around and saw a fire extinguisher lying in the corner of the wall. Gabe was being overwhelmed by the majority of them, then suddenly realized that Seth was behind them and then smashed the bottle straight into the head of the other guy, making a loud bang that could be heard all the way to Bin Duong. In the crowd, there was a guy who saw and immediately recognized him as the person they were looking for in the picture and ordered everyone to finish and catch Seth. Seeing the bunch of bastards coming, he quickly pulled the pin out and sprayed towards them. Not angry but giving them the bottle to take home, then he had to jump inside the crowd to avoid it. Don't know what happened inside that one after another popped their heads out, until Seth ran outside without forgetting to grab the head of a guy and slam it down on the floor. Before June's astonishment, Seth just took a breath and finished without sweating a drop. On this side, the teacher was calling 911, he quickly reported that there was a black society attacking Yongjin School. But the police over there heard this and argued that they were short of staff and couldn't make it in time, but in fact they didn't care. News also doesn't care. Seeing the teacher desperately calling and being unilaterally hung up by the other end of the line, the guy with the thin face came over and smiled happily. But then someone ran in and interrupted his fun, reporting that they had found Seth, making him even more excited. All of them were bombed to pieces but still didn't know to be afraid and dragged the flock to come again. Gabe couldn't call Seth, but he texted him to let him know. Hearing that, Seth immediately got angry and his veins popped up one by one. But after thinking for a while, he ordered Gabe to hurry up. Seth didn't need him to protect him, so he could be bold and hit them. And outside, each one of them was beaten by Seth until their faces were unrecognizable. Instead of someone preparing to hit him from behind, he quickly turned around and threw a beautiful kick right into his shoulder. The guy just sank down and didn't hesitate to add another blow to his face. He killed him and returned to his comrades, and finally finished them off, but before he could breathe, he saw Seth and Gabe dragging them outside. The reunion party was not only that, but also Brock and Victor joined. Seeing them also sticking their noses in, he warned them to get lost. Suddenly, the flat face brought his men out, and as soon as he saw him, he remembered that he was the one in the picture who was targeting him. He asked him what he wanted and barked quickly. Of course he didn't come here to see the wonders, but to take the head of the leader of Sunlight and show off to the world. Provoked by him, Seth wanted to beat him up, but he was blocked by the two others in front of him, seeing that the flat face didn't give up and called his powerful henchmen out. As soon as he stepped out, everyone knew that he was their prey. Brock and Gabe had just taken their positions when he flew over and greeted each one with a punch in the face. Seeing the glasses guy take on too easily, Seth couldn't help but go crazy, and now the police with blank faces finally came. And then, when they only looked from the outside, they confirmed that Elle had nothing to do with it and said they should have gone drinking instead, but then suddenly one of them noticed something inside. The lame cop went to the gate to check and saw the bald guy who was lying flat on the ground earlier. Looking at the cars parked next to him, he knew something had happened. He pulled out his radio to report to his superior, but before he could say anything, he heard the sound of brakes, and as he turned around, he saw a black car. Getting out of the car was a branch manager in China of the Sunshine Group, nicknamed Y, and leading a group of people. Seeing the gangs coming one after another, the police suddenly shrank back. But before they could ask, another group of cars stopped, and then the branch manager of Songnam, Jonas. They immediately appeared here because the boss himself had ordered. Not only them, but there were 500 brothers who came with them. All of them were bloody and rarely appeared, but now they were all here. Y called Jake to confirm what to do next. He was now on a helicopter flying back at high speed. At this point, after the glasses guy had dealt with the two others, he appeared in front of Seth. Their eyes met, but before they could say anything, they were interrupted by the screams of the other two. Even though they had been beaten up, Ruth and Gabe were still very eager, but Seth suddenly stopped them and then smiled. Because he would be the one to teach this glasses guy some manners, instead of him taking his position, Seth just opened his mouth and shouted, "Come on," then he was brushed by his hand. He was faster than he thought and left a mark on his face. The guy also realized that Seth still couldn't keep up with his speed and kept attacking him. He hit and he dodged. The audience outside watching also had to sweat. The guys upstairs also had a lot of things to do, but they stupidly took out their phones and recorded the video. The teacher was calling the police when she saw Sophie asking to go down to the corner of Joy. Even though Seth had warned her not to let anyone out of the class, she still agreed to let the mother's child go as she was the lunch teacher. The attack of the glasses guy was very powerful and tore his shirt, but Seth quickly caught up with him and grabbed his arm. Seth swung his fist out, thinking he would land safely on his face, but this guy was not easy and fell back to avoid the blow. In less than a second, the glasses guy was able to keep a safe distance from him, but the stronger he was, the more he made Seth angry. He quickly wiped the blood on his face and rushed to him, and he was just like Seth, feeling very excited to meet an equal opponent. They rushed at each other like friends. You hit and I dodge. Seeing the glasses guy preparing to kick him, Seth ducked down and gave him a punch. But he was still on top of Seth, who had to take his kick, but that only made him feel more stimulated by the very cool feeling. This time, it made the glasses guy run out of words, not knowing what to say, tired, and suddenly there was a helicopter flying over, making everyone itch. Seth stepped down from there, leading a bunch of brothers who were more hungry than the enemy, to Seth's face. Seth bowed to the boss and they all bowed to him, showing their respect for him. The incident made the students who were watching and the two policemen dazzled, and the Chinese gang had been there for a long time, sitting on the rooftop and observing everything. Doan finally witnessed the strength of the one who had been with his brother. If he gave him another chance, he might not be able to beat him. Everything was now tense, and there were even cops involved, but they decided not to show up right away, but to sit there and fish in troubled waters. But if you don't do anything and just want to eat, you only eat shit, eat pants. Seth's mother appeared behind them out of nowhere, not knowing if it was a ghost or a demon. When they realized it, it was their doom, and Seth down here absolutely forbade them to interfere, because he wanted to fight fair with the glasses guy. But in the end, they were all just rats caught in the trap of the people behind the camera screen, who didn't need to show up and still benefited. Seth was stubborn, thinking that if anyone interfered in his fight, he would be the loser. But it's not that simple now. Looking around, there are people everywhere who are injured and gasping. Zed wanted to stop him and let Seth rest, but he was still stubborn and insisted on finishing this fight. No one was allowed to interfere. Zed also ran out of words, eating what was so stubborn like a cow. After solving it, Seth turned back to the fight. The glasses guy also had to go back and confirm the order of the flat-faced guy before dating to rush in. Getting to fight each other to their heart's content, Seth smiled happily, ready to bite him, but once again he was stopped. This authoritative voice made everyone stop and look around. It was the Great Mother who came, and they automatically made way for her to go. Seth's mother appeared and noticed the camera, but she ignored it and said she would deal with it later. She immediately turned around and ordered Zed to check if anyone was seriously injured and then take them out of the school. He had just opened his mouth to speak when she scolded him. "Since when did you dare to disobey my orders?" Her cold eyes made Zed feel a chill down his spine. Seth's mother quickly summoned a man named Iam, who arrived in an instant, and gave him the order to treat the wounded while Zed dealt with the police. Everything was resolved in a flash and everyone dispersed according to her command. Even her golden son was punished by her. She said, "You are a leader, not a child. The world will laugh at you if you act like this." Seth did not dare to argue and just stood silently on one side. His mother passed by the glasses guy and knew that her son liked him, so she instructed him carefully that he had to finish the case, or else he would not have a way to return. When she approached the scarred face guy, he was not afraid and taunted her. But Seth's mother knew his background and gave him two choices. The first one was to shut up and leave. He was suddenly ordered and became angry, spitting out rude words. But before he could understand what was going on, the guy standing next to him fell down and his neck was also cut. She wanted to be a gentle mother in front of her son, but if that Lin guy did not know his place and tried to mess with them, then don't blame him for ending up on the altar, watching naked chickens with his ancestors. Seeing her take down a guy in a snap, the people there were stunned. Seth's mother continued to say the second thing. She let the glasses guy fight with him. The winner would be the king and the loser would do whatever the winner wanted. She pointed directly at the camera and told the scarred face guy that the one behind it would achieve his goal. He did not expect that the woman in front of him knew about the existence of the Xian family that hired him. And if they lost, they would never go back on their word. She saw him as a deer and said bluntly that if he lost, he would pack up and leave the boss position. Seth was very surprised, but when he heard about his dead father and knew that he would lose to that guy, he would be ashamed to death. He then smiled confidently and said that he would never be defeated by that bastard. Sophie and the irresponsible teacher were going down the stairs when they saw the aftermath they left behind. The girl immediately called her father. He heard that the underworld had come to his daughter's school and knew right away that the three-headed demon who had been eyeing him had shown up, so he reassured his girl that he would rush over right away. Suddenly, Yam's people came in and saw Sophie. He ignored the girl and examined them. After seeing that their pulse was still beating, he took out a set of tools from his clothes. They were still breathing, but whether they would survive after his hands or not, he did not know. Outside the gate, the Sunlight people were blocking the police to let Seth's fight go smoothly. Everything was tense as the scarred face ordered the glasses guy to hit him. He had received the order and took out a small dagger that he had hidden. He turned to look at Seth's mother to see if he could play or not. After he was not stopped, he dared to take a stance and start the fight. He pulled out his stick and put it in his hand. But Seth was stubborn like a cow and did not want to take it. He did not want to play with both hands to make it bloody. The Chinese guys on the rooftop did not dare to show their faces after witnessing the ancestor and retreated. They left the two monsters below, who had more guts than brains, to rush into each other as if they had found the love of their lives. 2 years later, Yongjin High School became an official school for athletes, and the physical education teacher was still sitting on the principal's chair. The freshmen just started digging up the videos and gossiping. The fight between Seth and the glasses guy was very tense. No one wanted to lose to anyone. His reputation then, one against 200 Japanese gangsters, was passed down to the next generation, but of course no one believed it, making the scarred guy furious. There was a bald guy who knocked on the door and ruined the atmosphere. He suddenly became the boss of grade 2, so he was scared. While he was showing off, there was someone who appeared behind him with a grudge. Because of his appearance like a pig, he blocked the traffic, so the handsome brother asked him to take the disc out. Buddy, suddenly someone interrupted him when he was cool, making the bald guy angry. The atmosphere was tense. Then there was a girl who looked very stylish, with a wooden sword wrapped around her shoulder, who came and said the same thing as the brother before, got lost. Being humiliated twice made the bald guy angry and wanted to punch the girl. Their eyes were both sharp. Then the wooden sword pierced his shoulder. His fist was only 1 centimeter away from the face of the bald guy. The bald guy couldn't imagine that both of them were not easy. In the video he was watching, it was the moment Sophie was captured by the scarred guy. Seth hadn't reacted yet. When a motorcycle came, it was Gabe, who had given him a ticket to heaven. But 2 years later, because of being in prison, he had his silky hair cut off. When he was released, he just stepped out and saw a car waiting outside. He was about to get in, but someone got out. Seeing the familiar face, Gabe bowed and said hello boss, and he was assigned to go to school one more time. In front of the gate of Yen-in's school, there was a male student who wore a very stylish bag on his shoulder and walked inside. It was the kid at the temple of Seth's mother who had been there. Remembering that time, the master was calm and avoided the electricity, calling the kid's name to the kitchen, still hearing "In no dying somewhere, come here and see." Called by the gentle teacher, the kid finally woke up from his dream. In no just woke up for 3 seconds and then collapsed, then he ate a stick straight to his head, waking him up. Not only was he beaten, but this old man was too much, he didn't let him grow anywhere. Then he continued to love the kid, while he avoided everything. It was when he ran out of breath. The kid had a pile of firewood and water books. He finished all the work, but he didn't know why he was always beaten. Master No was angry. The master just turned around and told him to pack his luggage, making the kid confused. He just hung up for 3 hours, how could he kick him out? But the truth is that In had taken the transfer exam 2 years ago and now he wants to graduate from high school. He has to carry his laptop to study. So In, a poor and clumsy kid from the countryside, came and found Yongjin School. In class 1 to 5, the homeroom teacher's name is Zo Cho, and in this class there are 3 main athletes, Zia Bei, the bun face, and the girl from before. The teacher, before speaking, was pushed by In, who opened the door and the heads looked at Zo. The kid bowed 90 degrees as the master said he had to greet the teacher. The kid did as he was taught and thought he was a good and smart student. But the teacher looked like he saw a freak and told In to sit down and he had to go to the principal's office. When the teacher left, the kid was still respectful as if he was seeing off the big brother. Then he turned to the kids in the class who were looking at him like an alien. In stood up straight and introduced himself. This was the first time he came to school, because before he had to take the transfer exam in the temple. Then the golden faces of the class appeared in full. Based on the address written on the paper, In finally found a house. He just rang the bell and didn't have time to ask. Then there was a voice inside saying come in, making the country kid startled. In was still quite timid because of Zo's head, but as soon as he looked inside, he saw the boss's mother waiting. Seeing the sister who had studied with his master here, In was very happy. The kid on the mountain was not crazy to come here and not get lost. In was given a room with full amenities, uniform, and desk. This was the room that Zed had stayed in. The kid would soon meet him. He didn't have time to sit and rest, his butt was hot. Then she took In down to the basement. After lighting the 4 candles at the 4 corners, the room had light and could see the weapons clearly. Zed's mother wanted to test Yin's level and told him to choose a weapon, but he just pondered and didn't want to fight because he didn't want to hurt her. Yin's eyes were no longer sparkling like before, but only cold and dead. The kid was taught to never lose in a fight. Yin's reaction made Zed's mother very happy and she smiled. She would definitely not lose. In the classroom, the presidents of the clubs gathered, and now Sophie became the president of the student council. The one who was showing annoyance was the president of Taekwondo Mike Han, and the one who was chatting was the president of Judo Pao KVK Aka. Everyone showed their attitude because they had to waste time here and couldn't practice, making Sophie very difficult. Then someone pushed the door and came in, dispelling the gloomy atmosphere. It was Victor who had dyed his hair black and now he was the president of boxing and also the champion of the ASEAN boxing tournament. As soon as Victor entered, the others became silent as clams. They just pulled out their chairs and sat down, their faces sweating profusely. Brock couldn't come because he had to train for the upcoming national match. Mike lost his patience and showed his attitude, asking them to discuss the main issue quickly, but they still hesitated and didn't dare to look at Brock. After they finished presenting the content, they quickly packed up and left. Sophie also arranged her stuff, but Brock was still sitting there. Suddenly, he asked her if she had any news of Seth, making Sophie pause. She still tried to smile on the outside, but no one had heard anything from him for a long time. Brock knew he had misspoken, so he also tried to comfort her. Seth had promised to come back before, making Sophie suddenly remember the memory of that time. She became a hostage in the hands of the scarred face guy, who pressed a knife against her face. She was scared and wanted to wet her pants, but Gabe suddenly played a game of throwing knives, making her more frightened. Luckily, he stabbed the scarred face guy's hand and made a sound. Otherwise, Sophie wouldn't have a life to stand here now. But the horrifying memory of that time made her shiver whenever she recalled it. To hide her trauma, Sophie quickly cleaned up and ran out of the room, leaving Brock alone. He understood everything because his hand was also shaking now. At that time, because of the knife that was thrown, Sophie was released. The scarred face guy was in pain, but still stubborn. She was scared and stiffened, sitting there. Only Seth then rushed like flying to punch the guy in the face, making him lose a few teeth. He was not satisfied yet and continued to attack the scarred face guy, who softened himself. Seeing that he was unconscious, Seth still refused to spare him and wanted to send him to his grandparents. Fortunately, his mother was able to stop that blow, or else there would have been a murder. Brock had witnessed everything then, making him still haunted by it now. He looked at his trembling hands and clenched them. Gene was sitting at the dining table and hadn't touched his chopsticks because he had to apply ointment to the bruise on his eye. Seeing that, Seth's mother urged him to eat. 1 spoonful of rice from Gene was half a bowl of fat. She wanted to fatten him up so that he could take over later. Gene suddenly paused and worried if Seth's mother was okay with the wound on her arm that was bruised in a patch. It had been a long time since someone forced her to fight so hard. On this side, Sophie returned home and saw that her father and mother had come back earlier. They sat down and drank tea, discussing the future with each other. She wanted to follow her father's advice and study law, but she also wanted to do what she liked, promoting sports. Brock and Victor had influenced her a lot, because they were so young and had become world champions. But he had seen through Sophie's goal, which was to work at Sun Production, a subsidiary run by Sunshine. She didn't expect him to see through her so easily. And of course, he didn't agree. Now, even if Sophie wanted to beg, he wouldn't budge, because he didn't want his daughter to face danger again. She knew she couldn't argue, so she just kept quiet. The next day, Gene wore his uniform and went to school, attracting a lot of attention because of his bruised eye and bloody nose. But he only cared about the crowd of clubs that were recruiting talents. The first time he saw something so fun, his eyes sparkled, and suddenly a big guy appeared behind him. Gene looked up and saw that it was Bao, who sat next to him, although the school required every student to join a club. But Bao was a specialized student, so he didn't have to waste time on that, and suddenly the jerk with the big head blocked the wide road and wouldn't move, just staring at the two of them standing there. Seeing his sly face, Gene suddenly smiled. The big-headed jerk wanted Gene to give way to him, but he didn't want to go around. While the little one was still naive and thought they were good friends in the same class. The jerk then grabbed Gene's shirt and threatened him, but the kid's face didn't change. Seeing that he wanted to take him out for a private chat, Gene obliged and followed him. In a deserted corner of the school, the bald-headed jerk continued to brag. He took a pack of cigarettes from his pants pocket and put one in his mouth, then sang a song about himself being Zika, the boss of the secondary school. But Gene, who had just come down from the mountain, had never heard of it and suddenly reached out and snatched his cigarette with a snap. Seeing Gene's smiling face holding his cigarette in his hand, the big-headed jerk got angry and used his fist. But the punch was like slow motion in Gene's eyes, and he let go of the cigarette in his hand and hooked his arm around the jerk's arm to stop him. Seeing his face smiling like a flower without any difficulty blocking him, the jerk got even angrier. And then suddenly someone intervened and told them to stop. It turned out that Bao had brought the student council representative Henry Kong, who had just arrived and assumed that the two of them were fighting. Hearing that, Gene immediately let go of the jerk. And imagining that he was being called a village gossip, he denied it vehemently. The jerk thought that his house was next to a warehouse of grenades and painted himself as the representative of the student council. And he was also a top 5 wrestler. He also boasted about his brother Brock's reputation. Hearing that, the jerk bowed his head, but Gene still didn't understand what was going on and stood there. Seeing the kid's attitude was very rude, he asked Gene why he hadn't gone to the council room yet. And before he could understand anything, the jerk turned his face and left. Seeing the jerk flattering, Gene understood what life outside society was like. And then the little one finally noticed Bao still standing behind him. Knowing that his friend was worried about him, Gene happily saw him as a good person. Brock was over there beating up a sandbag, and when he was done using it, he threw it away without remorse. His training process was always supervised by the physical teacher. And suddenly Akira came in. Now the bitch had become the legal secretary for Sunshine. Seeing her, the teacher had to bow his head. Akira came to tell him that their chairman wanted to relax his muscles with Brock. When he heard this, the teacher was a bit surprised. Even though it was a practice match, it was too much for just a few days later. But Brock, besides the cattle business, would agree to anything that anyone asked him to do. In class, Gene studied very hard. When the teacher gave an assignment, the boy eagerly stood up and volunteered. Then he confidently wrote the answer. He was praised and Gene blushed and laughed a few times. The boy had learned all these things when he was still on the mountain. In another class, Gene also enthusiastically introduced himself. He said he lived on the mountain with a great teacher. The rude kids in the class saw that he was naive and teased him. But Gene did not realize that he was being mocked and laughed along. Luckily, there was a big bun who came and shut up their mouths. The bun reminded Gene to go to the council room. He saw that the clock was quite late and the boy flew out of the classroom. 10 minutes later, Gene only ran around and did not know where the room was. He did not know what to do when he met Sophie. He saw a beautiful girl and approached her. He saw that Jean was looking for the council room and she said it was at the end of the hallway. She also warned him that as a new student, he should not cause trouble. But the boy insisted that he was not a bad student and turned away angrily. He finally found the room, but when he entered, there was no one there. And Lynn Henry, who had made an appointment with him, went to eat and drink with a servant. The lackey saw his handsome friend who was a member of the boxing club and picked a fight. He suddenly called him and asked his name and age. He glanced and saw the armband of the student council representative. He had to introduce himself as James Gu to get away quickly. But they wanted him to go with them to the council room. Jean was waiting in the room and saw Lynn Henry's face coming in. He shouted that he was not a bad student. It made him sweat profusely. He wondered if he had not taken his medicine or something. James did not want to but still obeyed the order and sat down. Henry said that this school had a rule that students could not bully each other. Because of the shocking event 2 years ago, they had made a rule that if they wanted to fight, they had to go through the student council and the club president with MMA rules. And Lynn had that right, so he was so arrogant. But he did not expect to mess with the daredevil. James did not want to talk much but wanted to bite the loudmouth for fun. The challenge of that guy made the two of them shocked. The lackey spoke up, but when he heard James say he wanted to fight instead, he shut up. Knowing that he had hit the daredevil, Henry borrowed Brock's name to brag. But James did not care about any of them because his purpose of coming to this school was to defeat Brock and Victor. Before his firm words and arrogant attitude, James wanted to leave, but the two of them were frozen and did not dare to say a word. When that guy disappeared, the lackey dared to speak. But Henry was sweating like rain and only dared to go and tell Victor. The drama was over and James politely asked if he could go. He still had a lot of things to do at home. But the lackey warned him that if he dared to tell anyone about what happened today, he should prepare his spirit to sit on the altar. James could not believe his ears, but he was chased away by that guy. The boy still obeyed. He suddenly stopped in front of the classroom and looked at them with a smile and deep eyes that vaguely wanted to challenge them and make them smell his presence. James walked back to class and attracted the attention of James and Bao Bao because of his angry face. The troublemaker also had a lot of questions but was dragged out by his henchmen. Then the two rascals whispered loudly to each other, wanting to teach James a lesson he would never forget. In the boxing room, Victor was grumbling and punching the punching bag, but James hated him and his gang. Lynn stood in front of him and was a bit scared, but still told him James's story. On the other side, the guy was walking home when he was pulled back by Victor. After being scolded for using the name of his club to cause trouble, he just came to say a few words of warning and then intended to leave. But this time it was James's turn to call him back. This guy was eager to get punched by Victor, so he wanted to fight when he got to the gym. But lately Victor was also infected with the mad dog blood, so he just said come on, I'll please you anytime. Hearing that, James also looked up, but was shut down by that guy, who made an appointment for tomorrow at the training room. Before he could understand what the motive was, the troublemaker came back with a bunch of people and asked if he wanted to have fun with him or not, baby. They teased each other and James walked by and accidentally caught sight of them. At Narita International Airport in Japan, a crowd of JAP Road Akira's people is following a masked man. There is also someone with old-fashioned glasses who bows respectfully to this person. On this side, Sophie's father is still replaying a video from 2 years ago. Seth punches the other guy in the jaw but gets slashed across the stomach with a knife in return. He bows his head and then retaliates by grabbing his chin, and the two crazies continue to fiercely attack each other, exchanging punches and kicks. Seeing that the two are evenly matched, the guy with the messed up face realizes there's no chance of winning. Coincidentally, Sophie's cat-like instincts kick in, and she runs back into the fray. Like a cat with a life-saving buoy, she grabs the attention of the guy named Seth. At this point, he immediately stops the video, calls someone to get information about the person he's looking for, and learns that the person has arrived at Narita Airport. He recalls a time when he encountered a lot of police but was blocked from entering. Luckily, Sophie's father managed to sneak in and rushed to his daughter. He witnessed Seth defeating the guy with the messed up face. Seeing Sophie sitting scared in a corner, he quickly took off his coat and covered her. In that moment, looking into Seth's bloodthirsty eyes, he felt intense anger. Jean, unable to handle the situation, decides to follow the crowd. Meanwhile, in an alley, James is defeating each of his opponents one by one. Just as he was about to leave, he saw Jean. The curious little guy was about to sneak away to play cards but was called back. James couldn't understand why this annoying guy kept following him. However, for the innocent Jean, following the teacher's advice not to fight and not to harm those weaker than him was a must. Suddenly, the one who was taught a lesson became James. He went crazy and wanted to punch the kid. But in the blink of an eye, his punch was blocked by a kick as fast as lightning from Jean. The kick was too fast and too dangerous. It made James stunned. At this time, Jin's serious face showed a victorious smile. He saw the kid dare to mock him. It made him angry and he gritted his teeth. He refused to lose and backed away. He steadied himself and fought back. But he did not have time to do anything. Jean was in front of him. But below, the kid's fist hit James's stomach. But the good boy was taught not to hit the weak. So he turned around and left before James's question. Jean returned home and immediately went down to the basement. He took a breath and revealed his muscular body. Then he closed his eyes. Seth's mother appeared vaguely. She did not have time to touch him. She was hit by a knee in the arm. Then Jean kicked a kick. He did not hit her, but he was hit by a Buddha in the eye. The kid suddenly breathed heavily when he remembered. He decided not to be hit again and got up. He started his training. In Japan at this time, Rose and Jiabi chatted for a long time. They talked about everything under the sun. But the atmosphere inside was tense like a string. The two three-headed demons had tasted the pain. They sweated like a shower. And there was John Bezer. He was the boss of the Mandu gang. And the one who gathered them was our main character Seth. He appeared. He ordered Akira to take the remote and activate the projector. The image of a large stadium appeared. It amazed everyone. It turned out that Seth would organize a match at the Osaka stadium. He wanted these people to put some players in for fun. Of course, the indispensable presence was the most bloodthirsty one. Seth would also participate. John seemed to only wait and agreed to the plan. He left. But he did not forget to ask if there was a weight limit for weapons. He knew he could confidently show his personality. John was excited. Even Seth was also looking forward to 3 months later. He smiled and wanted to celebrate. Seth's mother was holding a long spear at this time. Jean had just dodged the attack. He realized that she was going to kick. But because of the speed, the kid could only defend and take the hit. Jean did not give up and fought back. But Seth's mother smiled because her hand had blocked the attack. So the two continued to fight. They did not stop until they separated. It was because both sides were exhausted. After training, Jean was rewarded with a cup of coffee. The kid was very excited and told how fun it was at school. He had made friends with 2 people, Bon Bao and James. But Seth's mother wanted to ask the kid if he had a stick yet. Because before she went down the mountain, the master had told her to bring back a strong man. So when her husband died, she could never go back. Jean heard this and sweated profusely. He felt pain and wondered how he could get a stick now. They acted like it was easy. Brock was now participating in a match. His opponent was a lightweight zone boxer ranked 7th. This was the first time that he faced someone in the top 10. But he was not worried because Brock knew that the name Golden Rooster Comb was not worth a finger of Seth. So he had nothing to worry about. The match started. The Golden Rooster Comb did not even get to hit Brock's face. He was kicked by him and flew away. He did not have time to land on the ground. He was hit again by an uppercut and thrown back to the ground. Before 5 seconds, the match was over. Brock went straight to the physical teacher and wanted to be promoted. He was bored with these guys. Everything happened. Seth saw it behind the screen. He ordered Akira to add him to the match list. The students were amazed by Brock's overwhelming victory. They were chatting happily. Then the bald guy suddenly pulled the door and came in. They saw the wound on his face. They did not dare to talk much. But because he was too fierce, they only pretended to ignore him. Bon Bao and Era came into the class. His face did not change. But until James came in, the bald guy sweated and trembled like a rat. He saw him approaching him. He remembered the horror of being beaten up. He was scared and wanted to wet his pants. But suddenly Jean appeared like a god. He reminded him not to bully the weak. James was angry on the outside. But his hand was shaking involuntarily. He knew he could not fight back. He only played a game of wrestling with the jerk and went back to his seat. But suddenly Era came to pick a fight. She laughed and teased James for being beaten by a country boy. He was told the truth. He did not know how to spell the word country except for denying it. But he could not hide it. She saw his shaking hands. Then she suddenly changed her target. She wanted to teach Jean a lesson. At lunchtime, Jean looked at his full tray of food. He drooled. Suddenly Bon Bao sat next to him. But the notable thing was his huge plate of rice. So they competed to see who ate more. But when Jean was full and almost burst his button, Bon Bao still ate another full tray. Suddenly Era sat down opposite Jean. She did not beat around the bush. She went straight to the point. She knew that James was scared to death. She asked the kid to go to the rooftop after school. But Jean did not understand. He waited until Era left. Then he dared to ask Bon Bao what was going on. Except for Jean, anyone who looked at it knew that she wanted to fight the kid. It made him think for the whole class. He just looked at Era. A new black car drove into the school. The person who got out of the car and opened the door was Akira. So it was Seth who came back to school. At this time, Jake was sitting at the desk. Akira and Seth opened the door and came in. He saw the boss coming. He stood up and gave him his seat. Seth was the one who arranged for Jake to do this boring new job. But he did not dare to disobey. He just kept quiet. He updated Seth that his mother had taken a disciple not long ago. He did not understand what his mother was doing. But he did not care. Seth asked him if he liked this new job. He saw that he did not care much. He just gave up joking with him. Seth changed into the uniform that Akira brought. It had been a long time since he wore the school uniform. Suddenly, Jake talked about the plan that he was carrying out and said it would not succeed because there was no way to find him, making Seth annoyed. He wondered what kind of face that guy had that both Jake and his mother tried to stop Seth from avenging his father's death. He was not someone to joke with because even the trio could not stop him, let alone Seth. Hearing this, he got angry and threw an object at Jake, making a hole in the wall. Seeing that his face could be held like that, he felt a bit shaken. But his hand involuntarily trembled slightly and his face had to act tough. But Seth swore that he would find the one who killed his father, so no one should interfere. Jean was completely intending to go home and eat the meal that someone else's mother cooked, but he was called back by Era's mother. Because the kid dared to ignore what she said and did not go to the rooftop as promised. But Jean just looked at Era once and gave her the cold shoulder and turned away, making her angry and pulling out her wooden sword. She ran to aim straight at the kid's bad mouth and stabbed, but Jean just had to tilt his head to dodge. Even though Era tried her best, she still could not hit Jean. And at this point the kid could not stand it and decided to fight back even with a girl, he did not care. But suddenly there was a voice calling Jin's name at the right time. It turned out to be Akira. Seeing her, the kid happily ran over. He wanted to take her home and eat the meal that his sister cooked, but as soon as he mentioned Seth's mother, Akira broke out in a cold sweat. But then he saw Boss finished his work and went out to the car. Akira felt like he was saved and ran to Seth's place, and then drove away. But his face made the kid ponder for a while. Seeing Jean standing up straight, Era asked the kid if he knew the man earlier. That was Seth, the one who stood on top of their high school. Everyone in school knew because they had watched the video. But Jean had just come down from the mountain, so how could he have something luxurious like a phone to watch? So Era had to take this country kid to wash his mouth and eat kimbap tteokbokki. And let Jean borrow her phone to watch the enlightening video. Although he did not care much, the kid was attracted by the fierce fight of the two of them. Hearing Era say that Seth was going back to finish his graduation, the kid started to ponder. Jean just got home and saw Jack, the leader of the Ian and Jean gang, with Seth's mother. Seeing this burly man, the kid still bowed politely. Jean knew something was going on, but she did not want to say it. Today there was no training, so she let the kid go to his room and rest. Suddenly Jean mentioned that he had met Akira and Seth's son earlier, making her quite surprised. But she did not expect Jean to tell the truth that he brought the kid down the mountain because of her son. But this was not the time, so his mother continued to deny it. However, she still asked Jean to tell Seth to come back home if he met him, and if not, to use force to bring him back. Because there was no other way, Seth was now blinded by revenge and no longer listened to his mother. Jean heard that and could only agree. At Sunshine Corporation, Ruth was holding a stick that was ready to fire. Jab had prepared 2 sticks and there was also Akira. They were all ready to fight with Seth, who was thirsty for battle. Akira secretly pulled out 3 darts and shot them to lead the way for Jab and Ruth to follow. But in Seth's eyes, it was like slow motion and he could easily dodge to one side. Then he quickly ducked down to avoid a kick, turned around and swept Ruth's leg. Akira could dodge Jab's hand and give him a hook punch plus a combo of a finger to the chin. Akira used his life to fly over, but Seth only had to dodge slightly to avoid it. The 3 of them started to signal each other to surround him at the same time, making Seth amused and laughing. Then the scene changed and the other 2 were beaten so badly that they didn't have to kill today. Only Seth was like he had just walked in the garden and was full of energy. In France, there were 2 players fencing with each other. But the blonde one was weaker and was hit by a flying helmet that stabbed straight into his heart. This was Pierre, who was more talented than others but did not participate in any Olympic competitions because he found it boring. Suddenly there was someone who came in and bowed. He gave Pierre a red paper with 4 dragons fighting for a pearl on it. Receiving it, the guy grinned and smiled with delight. In the US, Brock knocked out his opponent with a kick to the neck. Instead of the bodyguard who was watching him, he received a phone call. It was Boss who called Brock to return to the country. The guy knew that there was a fight coming up. Next was Japan, where there was a house in the middle of the mountain. Glasses went to find the man who was called his master. Turning back to Korea at the high school. There was a car driving recklessly as if it was the road that his grandfather left behind. Then getting out of the car was Seth, the one who bought the school back with money. He was cool, but suddenly Jae-hoon popped his head out and wanted to chat with him. Sophie stood on the floor with her 100 out of 10 eyes and could see Seth. And down here Akira was terrified and didn't know what the kid wanted to do to him. Then he caught the eye of the mother's son and told Seth about Jin's identity. But he couldn't believe his ears and started to examine the kid. He did not expect that the kid in front of him was his mother's apprentice. But Jae-hoon did not bother to beat around the bush and went straight to the main issue that she wanted Seth to come back home. After the task, the kid turned around and left, but was pulled back. Then he saw Seth's face as fast as a monkey's ass and could not believe that there was someone who dared to talk to him like that. Akira tried to calm him down, but it was useless. Seth became even more furious when he knew that many people had witnessed the rude attitude of this brat towards him. But Jae-hoon insisted on going to the end with the tiger and wanted to teach Seth a lesson for life. Not only making him angry but also very curious about how strong this guy was. It was tense like a string when suddenly Sophie came in. His eyes were cold, but when he saw the girl from the past, they became very gentle. But before he had time to enjoy, he was brought back to reality by Jae-hoon. The kid mentioned the school rule and then wanted to fight a match with Seth. He had not had anyone come to pick a fight with him for a long time, making him feel excited and shiver. Seth and Akira were assigned to class 3 to 8, his appearance made the students in the class scream. But what Seth cared about most at the moment was who Jae-hoon really was. Akira had to remember the time when his mother entrusted her to the master. Before she left, she ordered the mother's son to stay here and repent. Akira did not dare to argue and just obediently followed. The mother's son told himself that he had met Jae-hoon 2 years ago. At that time he was stronger than both her and Seth, making her very surprised. At that time, Akira accidentally saw Jae-hoon practicing in a forest. Just one kick of his made the tree more than half hollow. And Jin's face was very cold as if he had no humanity. In class 1 to 5, Era came to Jin's desk to confirm that the kid was playing with his life and wanted to fight with Seth for real. But the guy was silent as a sheet of paper and did not have a bit of emotion. At this time, outside the students were buzzing because of Brock's appearance. He did not go to the office but immediately looked for something to relax his muscles. Brock just entered the gym and immediately took off his coat and rolled up his sleeves. Then he tortured the punching bag. Victor walked by and heard the noise, so he also went in to see. Then he saw the gorilla playing with the bag. Victor asked about the situation lately and heard that Brock had been promoted again. But he did not participate in any boxing competitions. Anyway, he was not on TV like a star. Brock wanted to relax his muscles with him, but Victor refused. Because he knew that the two of them were not at the same level now. Brock also knew the news that Seth had returned to school and that was why he came here. He wanted to rematch, but he had never been on par with Seth even once. Brock remembered when he was called to entertain the boss. Then even if he punched or kicked with all his strength, Seth was joking and could dodge everything. Until he was cornered against the wall, he thought he had a chance. But in the end Brock's first kissed the wall directly. At that moment, he could not react in time when he saw Seth's lightning-fast punch. But he stopped when he was close to Brock's face. He let it go and wished him victory in the upcoming match. If Brock was considered a monster with his strength, then what was Seth considered?